Ladies and gentlemen, we're looking at how the world is responding to the energy crisis. Is there a crisis? Before we get into what's really happening in India, let's look at the global scene. Let's look at our neighbors. These are some of the scenes from our neighboring countries. Long queues at fuel stations, be it Pakistan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka. Most of them have announced austerity measures. Pakistan is in emergency gear. What it has called an energy emergency. Pakistan Prime Minister has announced a series of austerity measures, aims to cut fuel consumption by 30% immediately and mandate a 4-day work week for federal government offices, along with a work-from-home policy for both government and private organizations in a desperate attempt to save electricity and fuel. The Pakistan government has ordered the closure of schools across the country for 2 weeks starting March 16th, while universities are required to hold classes online. Sharif also announced a 50% cut in fuel allowances for government departments and restrictions on use of official vehicles for the next 2 months. The federal cabinet will forego their salaries for the next 2 months, while parliamentarians will see a 25% pay cut, and senior officials will contribute 2 days' salaries to the government funds. Islamabad has also enforced a complete ban on the purchase of new vehicles, furniture and air conditioners. Official diners, iftar parties funded by government have been prohibited even during this Ramadan season. In a televised address to the nation, Sharif said that due to the situation, the global price of oil has jumped, and if things keep progressing in this manner, prices will get out of hand. From Pakistan to Bangladesh. Bangladesh has ordered all public and private universities to shut from Monday, advancing the Eid al-Fitr holidays as part of the emergency steps to conserve electricity and fuel. Authorities said suspending academic activities would reduce power consumption from residential halls, classrooms, laboratories and air conditioning systems, while also easing traffic congestion in major cities. Bangladesh has imposed daily limits on fuel sales following reports of panic buying and stockpiling in several areas. The Thai government has asked more government agencies to adopt full work-from-home arrangements starting immediately as part of its emergency measures to curb energy demand. The move has been approved by their cabinet. The mandate applies to all government workers whose roles are not directly related to public services. The cabinet also urged government officials to suspend non-essential overseas travel for the time being, allowing only essential international meetings. The Energy Ministry has proposed additional energy reduction measures, including setting air conditioning temperatures at 26 to 27 degrees Celsius and encouraging short-sleeved attire. Well, something that's very common in Asian countries during the peak of summers. Myanmar has implemented alternative day driving rules. Philippines has begun work-from-home mandate. Egypt hikes fuel prices up to 30%. China has stopped firms from exporting fuel. China has set its economic growth target lowest since 1991. What about the reserves? What do they look like? Well, in terms of numbers, US is at the highest. 415.4 million barrels of crude oil in the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. Japan has strategic reserves that may last for around 244 days. China 130 days, Germany, France, Italy 90 days. India has strategic reserves for around 74 days, Pakistan for 25 days. Saudi Arabia's biggest oil refinery, in fact, in the in the West Asia's biggest oil producer, is cutting output by as much as 2.5 million barrels a day. And the Aramco CEO, Amin Nasser, has warned that the impact on global oil markets will be catastrophic. The longer the disruption from the Iran war drags on, prolonged disruptions to oil supplies due to escalating conflict in West Asia could lead to catastrophic consequences. And this comes as Trump made an explosive claim to American media, saying he is open to talks with Iran, something he has point-blank refused. Iran, though, has turned down ceasefire option and attempts at mediation by China. France, so this doesn't seem anywhere near an end, or rather even a pause, because Pete Hegseth has said Tuesday is going to see the worst offensive from US till now.
Today will be yet again our most intense day of strikes inside Iran. The most fighters, the most bombers, the most strikes. Intelligence more refined and better than ever. So that's on one hand. On the other hand, the last 24 hours have seen Iran fire the lowest number of missiles they've been capable of firing yet.
And I'm being joined at this point by Shehbaz Chaudhry, who's an editor for Blitz Bangladesh, live from Dhaka, as well as Adit Kothari, who's a foreign affairs and geopolitical expert. Thank you very much, both of you, for joining me. Shehbaz Chaudhry, let's start straight with you. What's really happening in Bangladesh?
Thank you very much, Nehaji. As you have mentioned, that is Pakistan is energy emergency. In Bangladesh, it's not energy emergency because the Bangladesh, I'd like to explain to you the annual consumption of diesel in Bangladesh is 380,000 tons, and we already have the reserve for 1 month. At the same time, we don't need to import octane. Octane is produced in 2 of the local gas fields in this country. So for Bangladesh, the main thing is how to find the source of supply for diesel, because after 1 month we have to find. And our major suppliers for diesel are China and India. We are sure India is going to supply required volume of diesel to us, but about China, I am not sure.
Absolutely.
Yes, but at the same time, Snehaji, most important thing is that what we are seeing in Pakistan, for example, they are not only cutting the energy use, they are also imposing several restrictions, cutting the salaries and blah, blah, blah. So it shows that Pakistan is actually in the economic catastrophe. It's a bankrupt nation, all of us are aware. Bangladesh is not a bankrupt nation, but for Bangladesh, now what is happening, people are getting panicked because of the mismanagement of the government. Government is unable to somehow cope with the situation. And if this war continues, and Trump is now running here and there to end the war, he is going to Russia, he will go to China, he may even come to India, because Trump is losing the war. So for Trump, it's a question that whether he survives, because if he loses the war, he will also lose his position. But at the same time, as you have mentioned, the countries that the Southeast Asian countries, South Asian countries, so we are having the crisis, particularly Thailand and Singapore. Bangladesh, as I said, we are fortunate that we have an agreement with India of getting a supply of 180,000 tons of diesel every year. We will get it through the Bangladesh-India friendship pipeline. But the problem is now this government is not prepared. And most importantly, Snehaji, I would like to humbly draw your attention to that for the last 3 months, Bangladeshi households, there is no gas supply. And this is very dangerous thing. Yunus could not solve it. And finally, I would like to say that Bangladesh vehicles are flying, mostly 50% of the vehicles, more than 50%, they are depending on LNG, CNG, compressed natural gas. We are not using octane or diesel in the major segment of the vehicle. So for Bangladesh, if we're talking about octane, we are not in crisis because we are producing diesel we will get from India. So Bangladesh situation is not severe as of Pakistan, because Pakistan is in severe condition, energy emergency, financial emergency. And one most important thing what will happen in Pakistan, what we have seen in Iran, that when there is such a crisis, there is inflation, people may come to the street. And in Pakistan, we know that Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf, they are being somehow suffocated by this regime of the Asim Union and others. So it will result in people's uprising. A mass revolt may take in Pakistan against this administration of Shehbaz Sharif and the military administration.
Right. Adit Kothari, if I can get you in at this time, we just had Mr. Shehbaz Chaudhry speak about the situation in Bangladesh as well as in Pakistan. We've also had a brief of what's happening in other neighboring countries of India. We will get to India also in a bit. But let's just look at what are we facing right now in terms of what lies ahead, because what seems to be coming is also conflicting messaging, which often happens during a war or a conflict for that matter. You have Trump saying that he's open to talks, indicate that he's open to talks with Iran, which comes as a jolt because that's not the language he's been speaking till 24 hours ago. There are reports coming in that Iran has said no to ceasefire talks, talks that were approached for by France or China. You have Pete Hegseth go on to say in the United States that it's going to be the harshest strikes that Tuesday is going to witness. What's this conflicting messaging coming, and how should countries brace for this? We're already seeing the crisis spiral in several countries far away from the Gulf region, and obviously energy and oil is at the heart of it.
So, Sneha, I think there is a lot of pressure on the United States as well. I mean, the pressure is obviously being compounded by various of its allies like the United Kingdom, allies like Canada, European Union, India, predominantly because war and economics do not go hand in hand. They are loggerheads primarily because they are conflicting in nature, and predominantly because of which there is a lot of pressure on the president of the United States, which is why we saw that sort of political posturing message that he sent out yesterday. And then we automatically saw how the oil prices sort of stabilized from roughly around $120 a barrel, coming down, slumping down to somewhere around $88 a barrel. So so that kind of political posturing is what Donald Trump is predominantly doing. But from his cabinet perspective, when we look at Pete Hegseth or when we look at anybody else within the cabinet, I think they all are they've made up their mind that they are going to be the minions of the Israeli prime minister, and they are going to go hard at Iran. They are not going to stop. One, for the stated obvious objectives, which is to destabilize the Iranian regime, which they perceive as a rogue regime, but also for the non-stated objectives, which is to basically control or rather exert control over natural resources and the sources of natural resources, which power global economics, which power the next evolutionary industry, which is going to be AI, and sort of the AI chips, which are sort of powered by helium. As we all know, that 30% of the traded global helium is produced by the Gulf nations. So whoever controls Strait of Hormuz will eventually be able to have or exert enough amount of control over the supply chain of that particular natural resource. Also, let's not forget that we are
let me just come in at this point. It's interesting because most of the countries, like for example, if you have Asian countries, whether it be Sri Lanka, whether it be Myanmar, whether it be even Laos and Cambodia, these are the, these states, countries are heavily dependent upon import. In India's case, at least over the last few days, what has happened over the last 1 week, at least 70% of the oil imports now is through non-Hormuz straits. How much of that works strategically for countries?
So you can diversify when it comes to crude and Brent. You can sort of diversify. You can walk away from the Strait of Hormuz. But what do you do with countries like, say, Bangladesh, for example? 72% of their LNG is dependent on Gulf countries. It's not easy for a country like Bangladesh to suddenly, decide to diversify to any other source. That also roughly about 70% of the LNG. And also the other factor that I think we are overlooking, countries like Pakistan, countries like India and Bangladesh, the Gulf workers are some sort of a key lifeline to the sort of foreign reserves that come into these countries, right? I mean, Pakistan, is heavily dependent on that sort of migrant remittances that it receives. Not to forget, Pakistan's own sort of reserves are steamingly low, somewhere around $12 billion as estimates put it. So, in these kind of things, multiple sort of sectors have a compounded effect on your national economics, which will then sort of result in the erosion of your gross domestic product.
Right. In fact, Shoaib Chaudhary, if I can get you in again at this point, India and Bangladesh have just, I think, today finalized on the deal for exchange of diesel, of how India is going to be providing Bangladesh with diesel despite what seems to be a crisis period among countries. India has gone ahead with its word on that. The deal has been finalized. India has not backtracked on that. But if we look at Asian countries for that matter, I mean, look at Pakistan. It's been debt-ridden. It's been salvaged multiple times by the IMF. But with what's happening right now and the way the situation can just about spiral, about how Adip is also saying that, you know, a lot of their workforce also depends on Gulf countries and also the remittances, for that matter, from Gulf countries. The direct hit that's going to take in Pakistan, and that's why we really see the energy emergency, as it were, in Pakistan. But if you look at Sri Lanka also, what's happening in Sri Lanka right now is also bringing in very difficult memories of what Sri Lanka has gone through over the last few years as well. Bangladesh is seems to be now in a period of, you know, stability with a new government that has been elected by the people. But this is going to be a huge challenge before the government as well, because even if we talk about reserves that the country does have, or the countries that really do have, a lot of it really is dependent about how much can it be used, released, and just the kind of crisis that may be facing us in days to come.
Nehaji, one of the most important thing that I'd like to also have you draw your kind attention to. You see, Bangladesh remittance from the expatriates is the most important. It's not only not the only important. We have export major income comes from the ready-made garments, but yes, expats. During the rule of Sheikh Hasina, the Bangladeshi expats, a major segment of the Bangladeshi expats, stopped sending remittance to Bangladesh to weaken the government. Now, as this BNP government, almost 40 million Awami League work activists, they are under pressure, under acute operation, and also Jatiya Party. So the supporters of these parties, they will also stop sending remittance to Bangladesh, which will have a major impact on the national reserve. And as my esteemed co-panel, Mr. Kothari, said very correctly, that Bangladesh will now have to find the alternative sources for buying the crude oil, because we have been so far buying crude oil from Saudi Arabia, from Qatar, and UAE. Now, these three countries are not able to supply crude oil to Bangladesh because of the Hormuz trade factor. And Bangladesh, because of the agreement signed by Yunus with the Trump administration, the so-called trade deal, Bangladesh cannot even buy the crude oil from Russia. So for Bangladesh, this is finding the crude oil source is most important factor. But diesel, I'm not worried, because as I have mentioned, that our annual requirement is 380,000 tons. We are going to get 180,000, and for your kind information, India has already started pumping the first 5,000 tons of diesel from last night. It has already arrived Bangladesh side, and India is there to save Bangladesh. But Pakistan's situation is extremely different, because Pakistan does not have an ally who can now support them with the supply of oil. No one is going to supply. And Pakistan also does not have the required foreign currency to buy the oil. So Pakistan, as I said, it is heading towards absolute collapse of the so-called country. And you will see people will come on the street against the military regime establishment and the Shehbaz Sharif regime, because Pakistanis know that the main factor of their agonies and sufferings are the army establishment. They will come. And as to the Trump, as Mr. Qatari also correctly said, Trump is now trying to show his losing face. And Iran has been repeatedly threatening that they are not going to sit with Trump. So Trump has been playing with the whole world with his so-called success in establishing peace. Now he will have to prove to his own nation that he has failed. And this is actually the biggest challenge for in the West is United States. They are in the biggest challenge. And in Asia is Pakistan. And I'm seeing if this war continues for at least 1 month, you will see Pakistan will absolutely collapse, and there will be absolute chaos in the whole country. And I'm personally, as the Bangladeshi, I'm very happy for that.
All right. Adit Kothari, my last question to you, your closing comments on this. You know, there's always a limit to which a terror-funded or a terror-backing country can really expect support. You know, it's not our job to look down upon anybody, but not mincing one's words, even in times of crisis, allies choose very carefully. And it's not a terror-backing nation that often is on their first Trump list.
So, I mean, Pakistan's future is rather abysmal. I mean, you know, Pakistan is not a country that owns an army. It is an army that physically owns the country. You know, they function like how the East India Company used to function back in the 1850s, where you know it's a mercenary which basically owns the country, and they are basically operating in every domain, every business that you can think of. They manufacture right from cements to diapers to everything that is consumable in the economy. So, you know, when this sort of a fiasco, a global fiasco happens, the repercussions of this can be, you know, humongous. We could see inflation spike up anywhere to about 10% if this war prolongs anywhere between a month
Absolutely.
to about 6
And
months.
no country is insulate from it. You know,
No
it's
country is
for
insulated.
everybody. It's
It's the
across
degree.
borders.
It's the degree of inflation that you can insulate yourself from.
Absolutely.
I mean, India will be able to insulate themselves right up to about 6 months. You know, from a Chinese perspective, they have reserves going up to a year. So it's just the degree of insulation that you can provide to your citizens.
Right.
So which is why senses will eventually have to prevail, and somebody will have to sit down, Donald Trump, and you know exert pressure that you know eventually the American citizens are not going to be insulated from the global
You know, I don't
ramifications
even
of
know how
this.
much of what's really happening is any more about MAGA, because even Americans are quite divided about that. But that, notwithstanding that, I think the world is clearly in the middle of a huge crisis. And I think it's going to be not just nationalism first, but it's also going to be self-preservation mode, survival mode, and of course, figuring out one's sovereignty and maneuvering some very dark times ahead. Thank you very much, both of you, Shoaib Chaudhary as well as Adit Kothari, for joining us.